I love public education. And in our state of Ohio and federally, public education is under threat. So I wanted to ask potential candidates who are running for office a few questions, 5 education questions, to figure out what their values are and how they will protect our public education in Ohio, in our local districts, or broadly at the federal level. So, welcome my next guest. Joining me today is Rose Lounsbury, and I just wanted to start off by just asking you what you're running for and how that office impacts public education in Ohio.
Yeah, so thank you for having me. I am running for state representative in Ohio's 36th district, so that's the Dayton area. Specifically, it is the suburbs of Kettering, Oakwood, and Riverside, along with the Dayton proper areas of East Dayton and downtown Dayton. So it's a mixture of urban and suburban. And the way that this office impacts public education is significant. It's huge. That's actually one of the main reasons that I'm running, because all of the laws related to public education in Ohio are pretty much made in Columbus, and very specifically, the laws around funding. So the biannual budget is what funds schools, and that is probably the biggest bone of contention among most people that I talk to when we talk about public education is we talk about school funding almost more than anything else. So it's not just funding though, because the other things that are decided in the state house are things like curriculum standards, uh, things like the state teachers retirement board is not really in the state house, but it is kind of part of all of the leadership of our state. So really everything from, kind of what is being taught in the classroom to how those things in the classroom are being paid for, those things are being decided. And teacher certification standards, all of those things are being decided in the state house. So it's pretty significant.
Absolutely. And you talked about some of the problems there with funding, but from funding to curricula to taxes, even, what do you see as the biggest problem or challenges to public schools in Ohio currently?
Yeah, so I thought about this question ahead of time because, immediately I want to answer something like school vouchers and that sort of thing. And all those things are problems. But you asked for the biggest problem. And I think the biggest problem in Ohio and nationally with public education is the narrative that many people have come to accept about public schools, which is that public schools are failing. And this is a narrative that started way before these voucher programs, even before charter schools. The narrative that public schools are not teaching our kids, they're failing at their job. And that narrative is so dangerous because in order to strip funding from an institution, take over an institution, boss them around, you have to first demonize them, right? And this is the pattern that you see in so many different throughout history, right? If you're going to take someone's land, you have to have a narrative about why you deserve that land more than they do. So maybe you say, well, my God says I have this land, I have manifest destiny or whatever. You demonize them first, you make them less than you, and then you can take things from them. And that is actually what we've allowed to happen with public education. We have allowed people on both sides of the aisle to say public schools are failing, the system is broken. And so then, if that is the case, it allows people to come in and truly break it, which is what is actually happening now. So I actually see the biggest problem because all of the things from, oppressive curriculum standards, high stakes testing, voucher programs, charter schools, all of that was allowed to happen because we bought into the idea that our public school system was failing us. And so that's the biggest
Absolutely.
problem.
Yes. And we see that with high teacher turnover. I'm a school psychologist, and fellow school psychologists are considering if they want to leave the field early. And that makes it harder to find educators for every school and every child, and just creates this continuous problem. But with that problem in mind, what are some of the solutions for that problem?
Yeah, so I think the solution, and I thought about that too. I said, well, what's the solution to a narrative? Well, I think a big solution is just the way we all talk about it. Instead of complaining about public schools, and I'm not going to say public schools are perfect. There's nothing perfect, right? We don't live in a perfect society. But I think all of us, whether you're elected or not elected, we could talk about our public schools in a different way. We could tell teachers how much we appreciate, and school psychologists how much we appreciate the hard work that they're doing every day. We could talk about our public schools with pride, and many people do. I actually know that most people are knocking on a lot of doors. Most people do, but I think we need to get louder about some of that. So I think that's something that all of us can do. Now, on a practical level, a policy level at the State House, there are a lot of things we could do to show that we value and appreciate and believe in public education. And those would be things like removing the universal ed choice voucher program, eliminating that program. I know it's being challenged in court right now. My school district is on board. I pushed them and pushed them and went to every school board meeting for 9 months to get them on board. But we can, remove this universal voucher program. We can hold charter schools to the same accountability standards that we hold public schools to. There should be requirements for curriculum. There should be testing requirements. If we're going to say that that's the measure of whether a school is doing well or not, well, all of our schools that our children go to that are paid for with taxpayer dollars, all of our schools should be held to those same standards. So those are some of the legislative things that we can do, and we could pass and fully fund the Fair School Funding Plan, which is a bipartisan funding plan that funds schools fairly, because we've had unconstitutional state funding for public schools since 1997. It was declared unconstitutional, which means it was unconstitutional before then. And we have this plan that both sides agreed on that was generally understood to be good and helpful for schools and pretty fair. And then the last budget cycle, the legislature just decided they weren't really going to fully fund it anymore. They're using inputs from, I think, 4 or 5 years ago. So the cost inputs are incorrect. So then the cost outputs are lower. So it's like if you went to the grocery store with a grocery list of today's grocery items, but the budget, the money, the cash you're given actually reflects how much those things cost in 2021. You're not going to be able to afford your milk and your butter and your eggs and your bread because you don't have enough money for it. That's what we're doing to public schools. We're saying, oh, here, you're fully funded, but we're using inputs that no longer make sense in 2026. So those are things that we could practically do at the State House to help, but we can all change the way we talk about public schools and the incredible work that they are doing.
Absolutely. And coming back to that idea of the budget, if we continually underfund our schools, we will see problems appear. But that's a self-fulfilling prophecy if we do that to schools first. So working on that problem would be a fabulous solution. And there are all of these big changes that we can make, funding schools and all those big pieces that we have to all work together towards. But what are some small legislative changes or policies that you think would make a big impact on our schools, but maybe we could rally behind a little more easy?
So one of the biggest ones, and this is something that I hear a lot from especially our urban districts, like Dayton Public Schools is the largest urban district in my area, is the transportation issue.
Mm.
So many people don't know that in Ohio, and this rule has actually been on the books since like the 1960s. It's been around a long time, but there was this law that said if there are private school students within the geographic boundaries of the public school, that public school is required to bus those private school kids to school. And I think for many years this wasn't a huge problem because there weren't that many private school kids. Most of them were being driven to school by their parents. It was like, okay, maybe once in a while the public school had to bus a kid or two. But now, with the explosion of vouchers, with so many charter schools that didn't exist before, places like Dayton Public Schools, I think 40% of the children within those district lines are attending charter schools, a web of different charters and private schools. And there's legislation that says charter school and private school students can only be on the bus for 30 minutes, no longer. Well,
Mm.
there's no rule like that for public school kids. They could be on the bus for 3 hours. So what happens is legally to avoid getting slapped by, with a fine or whatever it would be, the public schools are prioritizing taking all of these kids to all these different charters and private schools, and then they either bus their kids at 7 a.m. or 9 a.m. So in Dayton, elementary school starts at 7 a.m. or 9 a.m. for DPS because all of the charters and private schools start at 8:30, 8:15. And so I think a simple thing we could do is say, hey, and other states do this. If you're going to a private school or a charter school, figure it out. Figure it out. Start a carpool. Have them ride the RTA bus. Figure it out because what's happening, and I went to one Dayton Public School meeting where I heard them trying to figure out the transportation, and it was like being presented with 10 Rubik's Cubes at once. and trying to solve it. It is a logistical nightmare. And it's then the public schools spending all these resources on students that they don't actually serve. And so easy solution is get that law off the books and charter schools and private schools figure it out.
Absolutely. And it just shows it's another way that we're prioritizing the private schools over our public education, which every child is due that education.
Right.
And for you, what do you want your constituents to know about your public education positions?
I want them mostly to know that they come from the classroom. I was a public school teacher. I taught at Northmont schools, which are north of Dayton, West Carrollton schools here in Dayton. So I've been in the classroom. And one of the things I realized even back then was, the policies that would come down from the State House were often clearly made by people who the last time they were in a classroom was when they were a student. And it is a very different, as you know, is very different on
Yeah.
the other side of the desk. It is not what you think it is when you're a student. Being a teacher is very different. And so when I talk about public education, I talk about it as someone who has an actual practical understanding of what kinds of policies are likely to work and not work. But given that, I would still consult teachers before enacting policies because I just think, the people on the ground who are going to be the ones in the trenches having to do this, they are the ones we should be listening to on if this is a good idea or not, if this is helpful or not. So those are the things that I would most importantly want people to know. I'm also the daughter of two retired teachers. So like education is just, it's always been very important to me, public education. So I think that I come at it from a more lived experience maybe than some of the people who are making those decisions.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, and including the folks who are actually doing it on the ground, whether it's education or any other field, is just vital to the success of any program.
Right. And it's surprising to me. I've talked to police unions and they'll tell me, they pass these laws and they don't even consult us. I'm like, to me, it makes no sense. If you're passing a law that's going to affect the police or doctors or real estate agents or teenagers, whoever the group is, why are you not talking to those groups to get their opinion on what if that will be helpful or not? And I'm sure you're never going to make everybody happy, right? You can't
Of course, yeah.
everybody, but I think there's a value in people actually at least being consulted. And I think they're definitely right now in Ohio, many of our people in different groups feel like they're just not being even consulted on things that directly impact them. So, yeah, to your point, let's talk to the teachers. Why not?
Yeah. They have
Shock
some
them.
opinions and some ideas. I absolutely know it.
They're
For
smart people.
sure.
They're teaching
Yeah.
the children to read. They're teaching the children to do math. Let's ask them what they think about policies that are going to affect them.
Yes. And
It's
I think
common
your
sense.
idea of like getting away from this idea that teachers are glorified babysitters or putting down our schools or saying they're not effective is one of the first steps of treating our school professionals as professionals. So I think that's just such an important point to bring up.
And I also think, supporting our teachers' unions. So I've heard like vitriolic comments about teachers' unions. I'm like, these unions exist to protect their rights, to make sure they have retirement. These are not high-paid workers. Teaching is not a high-income profession. They deserve to work in safe working conditions like anybody else. They deserve, after 30, 35 years of doing this very challenging job, which is not babysitting. It's a very challenging job. They deserve a decent retirement and some health care benefits. So I think along with talking about how we talk about public schools, it's how we talk about teachers and teachers unions, because I'm a very pro-union person. My parents were both, in the teachers union. My dad was a union rep. I was a union rep when I was a teacher. And it's really important that because one of the big demonizing comments has been about the greedy teachers union and how they're just so greedy. I'm like, if you were greedy, you would be an investment banker.
Right.
There are a lot easier ways to satisfy your greed than to teach kids for 35 years. I'm sorry.
Right. Get into crypto. And it's just interesting to see. And when we have teachers who are trying to fight for better working conditions, that's the conditions in which students are learning too. They want better conditions for their students.
Right.
And we
Right.
have our governor candidate, Vivek Ramaswamy, wants to fight against the teachers' unions. And I remember Columbus City Schools fought for air conditioning in all buildings. How
Right.
terrible of them to want that.
Right. How many adults would work from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. in August with no air conditioning? Not many. I mean, you put 25 kids, you see every day, 25 kids in a classroom on the second floor of a building with no air conditioning, August 16th. Are you joking me?
Mm-hmm.
That's misery. Nobody
Yeah.
can learn in that.
No, and nobody wants to learn in that, and nobody really wants to send their kids to that kind of environment either, let
Right,
alone be the one who's teaching those children.
right, right,
Yeah. I don't know many folks, especially for the pay. I don't know many folks who
right.
would work under those
Right.
conditions.
It's like when you pick at the string of some of these arguments, they just completely fall apart because, yeah, if people wanted to just be greedy, they wanted to just get as much for themselves as they could, they wouldn't be teachers. And like June, July, and August are not worth it. Like that is
No.
not, it's not like, oh, that's, I mean, most teachers in June, July, and August are working a second job. They're
Yes.
working as nannies, they're working as camp counselors, they're running a landscaping business, they're door dashing in the summer because the job does not really pay enough for most people to live a middle class lifestyle.
Right.
It's very challenging on the salary, you know?
Yes. And we even see it at the state house. Our state house doesn't increase base teacher pay as much as the unions would like. And so it has to be a negotiation, and collective power is that union power.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's all things that would be very supportive of education, public education here in Ohio. Do you have any last things you want to share with everybody who's listening about public education?
The last thing that I would share is when you hear people talk badly about public education, I want you to even just do a little survey in the room. How many people in that room went to public schools, or their kids go to public schools, or their grandkids go to public schools, or their neighbor kids go to public schools? When we talk about public schools being a failing institution, that should mean that 90% of us are failures,
Mm.
right? I went to public school. My husband, who's a lawyer, went to public school. Many of my doctors and dentists went to public schools. So if public school is actually failing, we should be in a society that is just, failing from the ground up. The evidence in front of our eyes shows us that public education has done nothing but help our society. It is the greatest common good that we have, and we need to protect it. And the people that you know, unless you only know people who went to private school, which is probably really unusual, the people that you know have benefited from public education. You have probably benefited from public education. And so we need, as a society of people who have all benefited from this already, we need to protect it for future generations. So that would be my final word right there.
Well, thank you, Rose, and thank you for answering my 5 education questions, and good luck on your run.
Oh, thank you very much, Kara. I appreciate it.